I have a DVR that enables me to create a library of movies, most of them old, a lot of them back to the 30s, 40s, 50s, and some more current ones. But I've been noticing that so often the action pivots on the fact that the protagonists are not speaking honestly to each other. There's some kind of deception involved, some important thing that the protagonist doesn't want his or her beloved to know. I feel very uncomfortable watching that, and also have wondered. I've looked at the world around me and wondered, how much is that actually what's going on? And maybe not as much as in those old movies, but a lot. People seem to have learned to hide their cards in some important ways, and that's always been an unhappy thing for me about the world. I got involved in the late 60s. I lived in Berkeley. I got involved in the encounter group movement. First, I was a member of an encounter group. Well, let me just say that the premise of the encounter group is that you get a bunch of people together who have agreed to speak honestly to each other, to tell each other what they actually think of each other and what they feel. I found that exciting. The idea was going to be that after you learn how to do that in this group that's there for that purpose, then you can go out and change your relationships, be more open and honest. It seemed really important in terms of, do you want to have intimacy in your life? I mean, how can you have intimacy with somebody from whom you've hidden who you really are? Well, I was at a difficult time in my life too, feeling bereft because my father had died and my whole life had been thrown up in the air. But anyway, this was a route that I felt that I could take to bring more honesty into my life. And I was a member of a group, and then I got elected to be a leader of one of the next batch of groups, and eventually I got selected to be a trainer of leaders for that group. It was an exciting and I think worthwhile thing, but it turned out that the world was more complicated than just honesty as a value. It wouldn't be sufficient. I made efforts in my own life to practice the ethic of the encounter group. And I found out that it wasn't so simple because sometimes it really works well, and sometimes it creates problems that you would have been better off keeping your mouth shut. I discovered that as important as honesty was, there had to be some kind of an achievement on both parties to make it work. The person who's expressing something needs to have mastered some of the, well, we'll call them skills, but there's also an important emotional and spiritual component to it. To be able to express one's feelings and desires and needs and in a way that is constructive. And in this context, let me just say something affirmative about a movement called nonviolent communication, which I think is a very, it's not perfect. as a worldview. That's another story, but it does teach some important ways in which the honesty can be more constructive rather than less constructive. For example, one of the things is you make a request rather than a demand. And another is you express things from one's own point of view and not pretend to be some judge sitting on the top of the highest bench. Those things help. But it also requires that the person hearing the honest communication, the kind of stuff that people generally don't share, be able to receive it and respond in a constructive way. And it turns out that those achievements are not universal. In fact, it's particularly, as we used to say, something like evolved. It takes somebody that's developed some self-awareness and sense of one's place in things and respect for the rights and feelings of others. I mean, not everybody's got it. In fact, it turned out that the lessons of the encounter group movement were to be followed probably, well, it always required good judgment to know when, I got to know when to hold them and know when to express them, know when to walk away. Anyway, you know the song. And so, I mean, this is the late 60s and here we are, what is it, more than half a century later. And I found that I'm able to do okay for meeting my needs. I have developed some judgment about when honesty works. And I have a wife who's a wonderful person. I mean, she's the best human being I've known. But she is imperfect, like me, and she makes the opposite mistake. If I am inclined to put my cards on the table too much, which I think that is the direction in which I err, or would have a tendency to err. She comes from a different family culture, and in that family culture, a lot of things were not said. It was largely influenced by Swedish culture, and I come from a more expressive, let it fly, Eastern European family culture. And so she's a corrective for me. I ask her, what do you think? Should I, I have this impulse to tell so-and-so this is how I feel about that. And, I would say 60% of the time she'll say, I wouldn't do that. And then I have to decide, well, would she not do that because she errs in the other direction? Or is she giving me the necessary bit of judgment that I need to put onto the scales? So anyway, that's a little bit of the story of me and the issue of honesty. I could add to it that I've been a writer of books. Say from 1970 until, well, I got a book out in 2015, so long time. But in the 1990s, which was a time when I felt like I was more into asking questions than in giving my answers. I had an big episode of really wanting to tell the world some answer I'd come up with. And I still do. I really still do. That parable of the tribes up there. But I come in the 1990s to a place where, for a variety of reasons, I was just, really asking questions and open to revising some of my, for example, political attitudes. And anyway, I twice started writing a book called something like The Challenge of Honesty. And I found that as drawn as I was to that question, I didn't think I had enough wisdom or understanding to offer to justify a book. Um, so anyway, I've never written that book, but I did incorporate some of that in something you can find on my website, a betterhumanstory.org. There's a portal there that's called The River and Its Channel, and it's got to do with how much can we trust um, the clear natural process of unfolding to lead the world to where it should be, or contrary-wise, how much do we need to impose on the way things unfold some top-down determination um, in order to get the human world to be as it should be. And that's a version of this question of how much can we just really just be ourselves with each other and have that be have that work. Um, uh, it, Let me make at that point a kind of a transition to what you could regard as a different topic, but there is a connection. I've been in an awkward position for, well, I got an idea that I still think is really a big deal back in 1970. And I have felt since that moment in 1970 when I saw this or when I was shown this or whatever, I have felt that I had an idea to present beings. It would have a non-trivial beneficial impact on how the human world unfolds. And I think there's a real danger that if it doesn't unfold right, we'll destroy ourselves. So that's something I have believed. I mean, I've believed it, with a conviction. It shook my bones. It determined the whole course of the rest of my life. And I feel that way even more because I've developed the thing. And that's why I'm doing videos because, okay. So I've had that feeling like, hey, world, I've got something that might help human civilization survive. That's the honest truth. I feel awkward even in saying it in this situation, but that has been a part of my life since then. Well, at first I was just so on fire with this thing that there was nothing. It was just so powerful that I was just driven to. Well, I guess I didn't real well. I was really determined that this was what I was going to spend my life doing. But I guess I was shy a bit. But then as time went on, I felt I've got this thing. It's this big deal. The world hasn't recognized it as a big deal. It's not like you know let's say Einstein's comes up with a theory of relativity and then it gets verified and the world thinks this is a big deal. It revolutionizes how we think about space and time. It is a big deal. Anyway, the world recognized it. And a situation where I had this thing which I felt would put some fundamental things in an importantly different light. Things like how we understand ourselves. Things like how we understand why the history of our species has been the way it has, and what are the nature of the challenges? How should we understand what we as a species that's created civilization need to do? All those things I feel like importantly different light. And what I have, anyway, it's been developing since 1970 in various dimensions, and I've articulated it again and again and again. And some in series of art essays published on websites, book published even before the rise of Trump about the nature of the dangerous situation America finds itself in. Anyway, so it's been something that I've been very inhibited about sharing it. I really do not like the idea of somebody thinking that I'm grandiose. So if honesty has me saying things that's going to lead other people to think that I'm being grandiose and it's not plausible the claims I'm making, I'm not going to be honest. I mean that's not entirely true. There's been over the years a small handful of people that I've shared with them what my situation feels like, and the challenge of how to put this out. And but generally, I just walked around the world, and all but that inner few would have no real idea unless they read what I wrote, which most people don't. Just what it is I'm sitting on. Wanting passionately for us to get it together as a species, and feeling like I got something that could help, and it's not being out there far enough to help, and so I keep on trying to get it out there, and I had to decide at some point, what am I willing to do to get it out there? It's if it's as potentially beneficial as my conviction has it that it is, how can I justify not putting out what's true, what I see and what I believe to be potentially beneficial, and take the risk of having people look at me in ways that make me very uncomfortable. I mean, but I wrestled with this for several, up until I've lost a little bit of track of time, as so often happens these days. But let's just say, in the last 3 or 4 years, I was wrestling with this, like whether to give up, and looking at, there's an age factor here too. I mean, I've been pushing this thing in ways that haven't felt too risky, for many years, but now there's a time element that I'm going to be 78 in a few months. I think I was about 75 when I'm thinking this way. This mission that I have felt like called to, I mean, it was a spiritually transformative experience. I mean, I made a promise to something. I can't explain what that something was, or if I was, under some illusion, but I just had to do whatever I could do. And that's sort of the nature of a calling. And I guess people get into trouble sometimes when they've got callings. Think of John the Baptist. He didn't end up so well, and he had this calling to call out the evil in his time, as he saw it in King Herod. Ended up with his head on a platter. Things have generally not gone too well with people who feel called to deliver a message. Is summoning people to the good when some kind of destructive force operates. And you know, what I've got, this integrative vision, this better human story, can be seen in that way. I mean, I just got called, and you know, and the downside of that is that I haven't succeeded in getting the message delivered. Which has been a kind of a mystery to me that I'd like to share. But perhaps I should first finish up the other thing that this vision I was called to entails risks that I wasn't willing to take, and here I am, and it's sort of like now or never. I mean, if I haven't achieved the mission well enough, and I don't have a lot of time left. It's not like I can look to, okay, well, a decade from now, I'm going to do this or do that. No, so I basically made a choice a few years ago that I was going to stop being controlled by my fear of what the consequences of honesty would be. I would go out into the world and I wouldn't be, I would just be who I am. I would just let people see who I am and where I'm coming from, and just sort of like in human terms, just being perfectly open. The honesty of, you know, this is what one is called to be in this world, is authentic and share everything that's true, and do it in a way that helps create good things among people. And but I am very unconfident. I know how to do that, but that's what I've been trying to do. There's a Yiddish word, chutzpah, which has got a variety of meanings. That, on the one hand, chutzpah is a negative in that it represents being so nervy that it's unappealing. There's that sense of chutzpah, but there's also a positive sense of chutzpah. It's just sort of bold and brash and just out there. Anyway, I feel got this chutzpah problem that has led me to do some things that like making this video. But another thing has to do with Harvard Magazine. I've done something lately that took a lot of chutzpah. I didn't embark on doing it without first consulting with my brother, consulting with my best friend from ever since Harvard, consulting with my wife. Should I do this thing? Or just am I going to look bad in front of the Harvard community? actually got encouraged, still scared. And here's the story of what they did, the chutzpah of it. Harvard sends, I'm Harvard class of 1967. And ever since graduating, like every other member of the Harvard community, I receive every 2 months magazine, Harvard magazine. And it is really exceptionally good magazine. I mean, it's there for a reason, which is you can measure in dollars and cents in terms of the donations they get from their alumni. But it is, even if the purpose of it is largely to maintain a connected donor base, what they create to do that is really of high quality. And I've been reading it for years. At the end of it, there are a couple of sessions every time. At the very end, there are the obituaries, and I always check them. Sometimes I've discovered that someone I've been friends with died. But also, by class, as far back as there's anybody still alive, and then going up there's a sequential presentation of all the classes, and sometimes there's nothing but the names of the class secretaries, et cetera, et cetera. But sometimes some member of that class will post a statement that tells their classmates. It usually sounds like it's geared toward their classmates. But in front of the whole Harvard community, and everybody who's ever had, it's like 250,000 people. People who had done the professional schools or grad school or undergraduate or been on the faculty or any kind of role like that, they get the magazine. And it amounts to 250,000 people, and it's not a random cross-section of humanity. It's a pretty impressive slice of humanity. And people would post things which would sometimes just be sort of a glimpse into somebody's life and therefore a bit their humanity. But mostly, well, it wasn't that many people saying that much, but when they did, it sometimes was personal. But I think it was usually about people having some developments in their career, which is also a way of conveying what they'd achieved. So that was there was that space, and my class of +67, as you might expect, is getting older and older. And if I'm a year younger than my classmates, so if I'm 77, they're going on 78. They're 78, going on 79. And the number of things that they've had to report in that class part has been going down, and the number of people who are appearing in the obits, well, it hasn't taken off yet, but it's definitely been increasing. So since I've decided to throw caution to the winds, I'm habitually looking for ways of getting my mission accomplished, for an opportunity to do something that might make sense in advancing that cause. And I got hit, maybe it's about a year ago, with an idea that I looked at that space under class of '67 and how empty it was, and saw an opportunity to put out my better human story in utilizing that really valuable real estate that goes out to 250,000 high class people, and doing that in a way which meets the criterion for seeming appropriate. that's the deal, you know. It was a really pretty brash thing to do that I was thinking of. So I consulted, and I got encouraged at each of those points to do it, and I executed it. Let me read what I ended up doing. I wrote something which was maybe enough. It fit enough into the category of what people are invited to do with that space, but still being kind of in some fundamental way different. And the other thing is that what I ended up writing was just on the outside edge of okay and appropriate in length. It was longer than most, but enough in the ballpark. I thought that because of the nature of the message, the chutzpah aspect might bring out from them a feeling like, well, this isn't appropriate. So I was prepared for them to write me and say, we don't think this is appropriate. We're not going to publish this. I didn't know how much of a possibility it was, but I was prepared for it. And then I worked very hard to meet those specifications, put out what I'm trying to get out into the world, and do it in a way that might help advance the cause. So this is what I published, and actually in the January-February issue of Harvard Magazine, which is to say the current one, under class of 67, toward the end of the magazine, there is this statement that I'm about to read. And on the way, I had a very pleasant interaction with somebody at the magazine that was dealing with whether it needed to be edited for length, and who did a really good job, of cutting what would be best to cut if something had to be cut. But then it turned out that they published the whole thing. And I don't know if it was, if it did any good. The good would be inspire some of those 250,000 people to go to betterhumanstory.org and check out whether I deliver the goods. That's the chutzpah of it. All right. This is what's in Harvard Magazine right now. I've just published an essay of roughly 6,000 words presenting my life's work, an integrated set of ideas wrapped under the title, A Better Human Story. By better, I mean both more valid than what is generally believed and potentially having a beneficial impact on the human future. Included among the many ideas, the main ideas that I've derived over the past half century from examining the story of our species in an evolutionary perspective, starting with the implications of a creature taking the unprecedented and fateful step of inventing its own way of life, as humankind did some 10 millennia ago, are these. And then I have some bullet points. Any creature on any planet, anywhere in the cosmos, that takes the step onto the path of civilization, regardless of its inherent nature, will inevitably unleash a social evolutionary process as destructive and tormented as ours has been. Next bullet point. Therefore, the ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large. In other words, we are better creatures than we have thought ourselves to be. The emergence of civilization out of a biologically evolved order inevitably generates in two discernible coherent forces, one consistently life-serving, the other life-degrading, whose conflict will be at the center of the drama of the civilization-creating species. And then a final bullet point. Inevitably, too, that conflict will eventually require such a species to confront this inevitable central challenge, to order its civilization well enough, soon enough, to avoid self-destruction and to survive for the long haul. And these next two are the ones that he would have cut out if he'd had to cut things. And I agreed with that cut. But it's an important additional dimension of what can be seen in this integrative vision. Again, using the evolutionary perspective, but using it to achieve some other forms of meaningful truth. Okay, forgive that stuff. The inborn tendencies of our species to experience things in certain ways are not merely subjective, but have been selected for in the evolutionary process because they helped our ancestors to pass their DNA into the future. Which means they are life-serving. In that evolutionary perspective, and from our inborn tendency to experience things as better and worse, and our inborn capacity for spiritually transformative experience, it can be shown that both the moral and the spiritual dimensions are real, important, and life-serving. Believing that all these propositions can be compellingly established, and believing also that this better human story would fortify us in our efforts to create a more viable civilization, rather than having the human story culminate in some self-inflicted catastrophe, I remain, at the age of 77, a man on a mission. And then he would have concluded, and he did conclude with this parenthetical. The aforementioned essay is featured on the main page of my website, abetterhumanstory.org. So I'm being honest. What that said is a central reality of my experience of who I am. And I feel called to share it because whether human civilization survives or destroys itself looks to me like a toss-up. And, with the toss-up, who knows what the tipping point is, how it might be reached, and it seems that any beneficial impact might be the straw that breaks the camel's tipping point uh, in the right direction. So I do believe all that to be true. I invite anyone who would be interested in seeing all that, if it were valid, to go to a betterhumanstory.org. Uh, it is my honest belief that there's something there that, if it could get out, could help. By the way, the interesting thing that happened with this that I alluded to earlier was that it did get out. This thing, which is the parable of the tribes, was published in a beautiful way by the University of California Press. And lo and behold, the New York Times gives it a full page review in the Sunday Book Review section. And it gets announced in various ways to the thinking world. This is a book that, that argues as compellingly as it can that certain things are true that, if true, would have enormous ramifications for how we understand a lot of fundamental things. It argues them in the way that I got trained to do. I'm a Harvard summa for doing that kind of thing. So, I've developed myself into the very best version of that kind of a thing as I can. I got it out there into the thinking world with the help of various people, like I guess somebody at the New York Times who thinks this is a big deal. And then within a handful of years, after the Cold War is over, I think is relevant. The problem of power and social evolution. Anyway, by the early 90s, it was published in 84, by the early 90s, the idea had basically disappeared from the world. An idea that's argued by someone trained to think like that and making very bold claims, and it disappears from the world. And here's the part that has always mystified me. It shows me that there's some fundamental things I don't understand about the world. But nobody ever refuted it. I mean, nobody even ever laid a glove on it. Reviewers would say, I felt compelled to, etc. But nobody ever refuted it, and yet neither had they absorbed it so that it had become part of the thinking of the world, with, like, which has been my mission since 1970. Not refuted, not accepted, not struggled with. Is this guy, is there some hole in that argument? I mean, it was all laid out, in steps. You can Google my last name and uh, uh, the ugliness we see, or something like that. I have a piece out there that lays it out in steps, and I haven't found any way of escaping it being fundamentally true and very significant in the consequences for our understanding, if you recognize the extent to which it's true. But people weren't struggling with it. People, somehow, the thinking world took this thing. I felt I'd fulfilled my promise getting the book out. Took this thing, and after its presence being announced, just pretending that it had never issued that challenge to the way we understand things. I haven't understood how that happened. Not refuted, not accepted, not struggled with. So there is something that was true about the world that wasn't the way I had grown up imagining it to be. I had grown up believing that there's a competition of ideas out there as we collectively strive to understand the truth. But clearly, there are other things that operate than a quest for the truth. I don't, people have said, well, you were ahead of your time. So I don't even know really what that means. But I hope that here we are in 2024, and whatever might have been true in the 1980s and 90s about just ignoring these kinds of questions, maybe the time will have come. I don't understand how it works, but we're looking now at some scary things on the world stage. We perhaps should be, maybe people sense that we really need to be doing something. I mean, we've got a dictator with a massive nuclear arsenal turning peaceful Europe into a war zone and brandishing his nukes. And we've got an emerging potential confrontation between two other nuclear powers, China and the United States, over Taiwan, so that people are wargaming out what might be a significant conflict between two powers that have substantial nuclear arsenals. And at the same time, in another realm, we've got climate change gathering momentum out there, threatening all kinds of chaos and disorder and death and unhappiness. And we can see in the world around us right now that this human civilization thing might not survive. This my better human story includes understanding the inevitable emergence of destructive forces. Preacher does what humankind did when it embarked on the path of civilization, extricating itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically by inventing its own way of life. Just the ability to invent one's own way of life eventually will lead a creature with a sufficient creative intelligence into plunging into a kind of a disorder, because it has a creative ability to leave the natural order. That's just the way it is. That's inevitably the case. If we understand what it is that we're up against, we will be much more effective in fighting against it. I mean, there is a shape and meaning to this whole thing that is an inevitable consequence of a creature emerging out of the evolution of life that takes life into a whole different dimension, a new kind of life form, the civilized society. It is unprecedented in nature because it has been created by the imagination of the creature, not by the processes of natural selection. There is an escape here that actually has some unintended consequences, and I don't see any way out of it. Just, that's it. I hope that people take whatever sense they've got that, yeah, our species is really facing this challenge. Can we order our civilization well enough, soon enough to survive? Harness whatever sense one has of potential doom. And my sense is that actually a lot of the people I know seem to be even more pessimistic than I am. I get the impression that there are a lot of people who are feeling maybe despair about the humankind. Maybe that kind of, I've heard a lot of sense of doom stuff around the edges, but people don't talk much about it. But maybe the thing to do is if people don't know something to do to help lead to a better outcome, maybe taking in this way of understanding things, which I think is going to clarify a lot about what it is we need to achieve and why. I think it will fortify us at several different levels, thinking better of ourselves, which I think is important in itself, and showing us the nature of the force that we need to overcome. And I think that we can make progress in that direction better with what this thing shows. One thing you'll find there is my idea of a cosmic historian. Cosmic historian it has these two groups, civilizations that destroyed themselves and civilizations that got their act together. And imagine that I say it's inevitable that if a creature starts on the path of civilization, that both of those things are going to be operating. either there's a good chance that the species will end up destroying itself because it never brings its civilization under control. And our civilization has been fundamentally out of control. It's trying to today. Uh, and I don't pretend to have solutions. It's more a way of seeing what the nature of the struggle is, what the nature of the forces at work, what the challenge is. And one way I can take what little I understand about, where we put our foot, what the next things are, just say that we should invest a lot of energy in a couple of neglected things. We should be asking ourselves collectively to envision what human civilization would have to look like for it to have had gotten its act together, to have either eliminated or at least minimized the chance that we'll destroy ourselves through a nuclear holocaust or through environmental catastrophe or whatever the other way there might be for a civilization. We need to ask ourselves to envision the civilization that isn't playing Russian roulette with its survival. That destination should occupy an important part of our thinking, and it leading us to ask the question, okay, if the task is to get from here to there, what are the steps that we can wisely take that will have the best possible impact on helping us get to our desired or required destination? We do think it would make, I think that conversation would make a human survival more likely. And we're not having that conversation now. It is that the image of that destination isn't part of our collective thinking. And therefore, we're not making decisions about, okay, well, what steps can we take now to become more, further along toward that? So that's one way. So I invite people who think, for whom any of this makes any sense. If you've got that feeling like there's everything that we hold sacred may destroy itself through one means or another. Everything of importance is at stake, whether we destroy ourselves or not. And do you think I'm wrong in saying that in the next not so many generations it's kind of a toss-up? With that much at stake, the concern about the human future should express itself in some constructive way. And I offer my better human story as one possible, and I think possibly really valuable way in which that cause can be advanced. If you're looking for some way to help human civilization survive, and if the idea that there might be an understanding of an integrated, multidimensional understanding that has the power to move things in a better direction because we understand what we're trying to do and why, I invite you to go to a betterhumanstory.org and see what I invited my Harvard classmates to see. There is this thing that establishes pretty well some impactfully importantly different ways of understanding things. The secular worldview needs to be amended in some important ways in order for what's sacred to be protected better. The idea that the moral and spiritual dimensions, going back to those things that almost got cut, the idea that those are merely subjective or matters of opinion, as opposed to messages from the force of life that's shaped our DNA, that are there within us because they have been life-serving. Anyway, I offer it. I invite you. I am being me on the calling that's been driving my life. And I hope that I haven't been offensive. And it's difficult for me to have chutzpah. I believe in the American ethic of shucks, the quarterback that thanks his lineman, doesn't call attention to his passer rating of 120 or something for that game. I believe in that. It's brought up in it. Took it to heart. But it's not my intention to be anything other than real, because I believe in the fundamental power of honesty. It's challenging always to find ways of. I mean, we're better off dealing with the reality than in sort of bypassing with hidden important truths. This thing that's been driving my life is an important truth, and my hiding it instead of expressing it has been a burdensome aspect of my adult life. And so a couple of years ago, I gave myself permission to just be me and hope that that was okay. Thanks for listening.